Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal show, a little bit later than usual. Liverpool, the soccer team was on this morning, so I had to watch that. It was a big match, so I'm doing the show a little bit later today. But we will walk through the top 10 here for the weekend of November 30th through December 2nd. Once we get through the top 10, we'll do a deeper dive on the limited release art house platform movies that are vying for awards this season. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. Next weekend's going to be super quiet. No major releases, but we'll see what's happening the weeks after that. And then we'll wrap up the show. So let's dive into the top 10 here for this weekend. The numbers are out today. As always, the Sunday number is an estimate. The Thursday, Friday, Saturday numbers are actuals, but they're usually very accurate with the estimate for the entire weekend. So let's do this. So number one was Ralph Breaks the Internet with 25.7 million. A decent second weekend here for this Disney animated film. It was a 54% drop. Now, if you listen to the show, you'll understand that that's kind of high. If it was a normal movie, a 54 wouldn't be terrible at all. It'd be pretty good. Like if it was like a rom-com or a drama, anything that goes wide that drops about 50 to 55% in its second weekend is okay. It's pretty average. For children's films, those drops are usually much lower than that. You're usually looking at a drop of, say, 40 to 50% in its second weekend, sometimes even lower, down into the 30%. And the reason for that is just children's films tend to have longer lengths than a normal film. If you think about it this way, the average film makes about 90% of its total domestic box office in the first 4 weeks of release, in the first month of its release. Children's films tend to sort of last longer at the box office, and I'm not really exactly sure why that's the case. Maybe it's just the audience is different, parents taking their kids and stuff like that, but they tend to last a little bit longer. Probably their 90% mark, when they hit 90%, is more like 6 weeks instead of 4. And so that what that ends up doing with the multiplier and the drops is it lowers the drops each weekend, and the multiplier usually goes up. Let's say the average film does 2.7x its opening weekend. That's what it makes as its total domestic. For a children's film, the target is more like 3x. So for a film like Ralph Breaks the Internet, the expectation here, it opened up at 56 last weekend. The expectation from Disney is at least a 3x multiplier, especially during the holiday season. Again, because films just play longer during this season. They're expecting at least $168 million for this just domestically. And then worldwide's a whole nother story that I'm not going to get into. So with this drop for Ralph Breaks the Internet, it's a little disconcerting here. Like it shouldn't be at 54%, especially on its second weekend. Now, my guess is that this thing is the drop next weekend is going to be well below 50%, just because there's nothing else coming out. It's December. Once we get into December, we're in the holiday season. Drops tend to be lower. Movies play longer. Look to Jumanji last year. Look to The Greatest Showman last year. That's just the style and vibe at the box office during this next month and a half. The weekdays tend to be a little bit stronger because people are out on holidays and stuff like that. So I do expect that drop to go much lower next weekend. If this thing should hit a 3x multiplier. That probably won't be an issue here. The question was this going to be a 4x movie or a 3x movie? And it's looking much more like a 3x movie. This is definitely overperforming, I think, to expectations. But after the sort of pop off last weekend, when it really went above and beyond what I think most people thought it was going to do, now it's come back to earth time. This thing is definitely front loaded. A lot of people went to go see it opening weekends, and I don't know if there was like a quality issue because it has a good Rotten Tomatoes score of 88%. I'll have to look at the CinemaScore. I can't remember it off the top of my head. A- CinemaScore, which is a little bit lower than the original. Wreck-It Ralph, which came out in 2012, had an A. So maybe there's a couple things going on here. The critics loved it. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is a 68, which is pretty low. But again, Rotten Tomato audience score, we got to take with a huge, massive truckload of salt because it's like one of the most hackable things on the internet. So what I think is happening here is everybody rushed out to see this. The original has been out for 6 years, so it has a long sort of shelf life with DVD and streaming. So a lot of kids have seen it, and so they grow up and they want to see the sequel. I mean, there's some, younger kids wanting to see this one too. So you had this rush to go see it opening weekend, and now that sort of deep desire or need to see it is no longer there from that group of people. And so the rush is over. Now we're shifting over less to sort of the fan base and more towards the general audience. How interested are they in seeing this movie? How interested are people without kids seeing this movie? And so that group doesn't look massive. And so it's a little bit of sequelitis, I guess is sort of what I'm trying to say. Sequels tend to have, bigger drops, lower multipliers than the original. That's just the nature of film and the box office. So I think that's probably what's happening here. Now, is that a bad performance? No, it's a fantastic performance. This is a home run for Disney. I think the expectation here was, hey, it's been 6 years since the original, so I can't think they couldn't have expected this to do like insanely well. The original did 189. I don't think this will make it there. It might. It is the holiday season though. I could see this having just like super low drops from here on out all the way through Christmas. So maybe 189 is doable. It should be doable since the original opened up at 49 and this one opened at 56. You would think that 189 would be easy to hit, but if you have drops like this, that's not going to happen for Ralph. But I'm not ready to sort of read this one way or the other. Yeah, it's just one second weekend here with a 54% drop. It's not the end of the world. My expectation is that these drops are going to drop significantly, and that 189 mark should be easy to hit. You would also think like maybe the 200 mark is within play here. It's a Disney movie. It's animated. They play forever. So a little bit of a concern here probably from Disney that this drop is too high, but hey, they're laughing to the bank at this point because it's already been a success. And so that's Ralph Breaks the Internet and its second weekend. Not a great drop, but I expect that to sort of correct over the next few weeks, and it should be smooth sailing to that 170 to 200 mark. Coming in at number 2 is another children's film, Dr. Seuss The Grinch from Universal, 17.7 with a 42% drop. And that's a more normal children's film drop, especially during the holiday seasons in the 40s to low 40s. Lost just a handful of theaters this weekend. Per theater average in its fourth weekend was $4,500. Total gross so far for Dr. Seuss is $203 million off of a production budget of $75. So this one's doing fantastic. There's not a lot more I can say about this one. In terms of the multiplier, I'm looking at the drops, weekend over weekend, it's looking pretty good. Had a 42% drop its second weekend, a 21% drop. That must have been Thanksgiving weekend. That's phenomenal. Everything had a really great drop Thanksgiving weekend. Then another 41% drop here. So this one, I misread this one in two ways. The first was I thought it wasn't going to open up very high at all. I was thinking more like 35 to 40 something. And I was like way off. It opened up at 67. So I totally misread that. And I'm also misreading its drops because I felt like it was one of those movies where it would have a more normal sort of drop multiplier versus like maybe a 2.7 because the quality didn't seem like it was great. 58% Rotten Tomato score, 59% audience score. It kind of felt like this one tricked people a bit, and that what happens with this sort of stuff is you have this movie and this character that everybody knows, right? And there weren't a lot of children's films coming out a couple of weeks ago or a few weeks ago, so you kind of everybody gets hyped up for it. They go see it. It's not very good. I think we can objectively say it's not a very good movie. A- CinemaScore though, so that's not too bad. So my thought was this thing was going to drop a lot harder than it is, and that's just not happening. This one, it's cruising past 200 right now. The expectation Again, talking multipliers and sort of performance past the first weekend, because it's a super important part of the box office. The expectation here was at least 200, right? So it opened at 67, at least a 3x multiplier. It's going to breeze past that here in its fourth weekend. So the question is, how high is this thing going to go? Now, I get the feeling that they opened this up at the perfect time, because it's not going to go away until New Year's probably. And so you're probably looking at like a 3-4 multiplier, which is pretty good. Not like amazing for a children's film, but pretty good. You're looking at like 230-ish. I think it could even go higher than that. Just because it's one of those movies where you're not taking that much of a risk if you have kids, right? Like, you're like, what should I go see at the box office? Oh, the Grinch is out. Okay, fine, whatever. It's one of those movies. And it's going to be around for the next month, so I'm thinking somewhere around 220 to 240, somewhere on that range. So a really good multiplier. Universal has to be ecstatic about this performance. There wasn't a huge ton of hype before it came out. And there's not really a ton of hype after it came out. I think it was just like the right product at the right time for the right group of people. And it just popped off. And it's not really going away. So I'm sure Universal is very happy about how this rebooted animated Grinch is doing here. And we'll see if it can keep those low drops. If it keeps dropping in the 40% over the next like 3 weeks, then it could like a 3-5x multiplier, and then you're talking like 240, 250. So a really good run for this movie. Number 3 this weekend was Creed 2 from MGM. 16.8 million, a 52, almost 53% drop here in its second weekend. It actually added about 135 theaters. Per theater average was $4,700. Total take so far for Creed in the second weekend is 81 million. Let's go ahead and see if they do a showdown for this movie. Of course they don't. That would be way too easy for me to analyze. I wanted to sort of see where this movie was at compared to the original Creed. So we're at $81 million now on its 12th day of release. Let's take a look at Creed and see where we were on the 12th day. My guess is it's probably doing a little bit better. 12th day, 64. So it's doing significantly better than Creed, which came out in November, 3 years ago, November of 2015. I hear it's actually a really good movie from what I hear and the reviews that I've read. 83% in Rotten Tomatoes. 88% Rotten Tomatoes score. I feel like I just have to like every time I mention the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, I feel like I have to give a disclaimer about it, but like I just can't do it every time. A CinemaScore, just like the original on for Creed 2 and Creed 1, both had A's. So it looks like people really enjoyed the film. I'm not sure what its post-track score is. Deadline usually puts that out. I didn't see it this round. So there's no quality issue here. People like it. That drop does seem a little bit high when I'm looking at those quality metrics. 52, 53, like I said, is pretty average, but you would expect if it's got like an A cinema score, it's got like high Rotten Tomatoes score, nothing really major came out this weekend. You would expect that drop would probably be a little bit below 50%, like high 40s. But again, it's like we just talked about with Ralph Breaks the Internet, sequelitis, right? It's every time you release a new film in a series, that fan base tends to get smaller and smaller, sometimes not by a lot. But like look at horror movies who are just notorious for, multiple sequels. By the time you get to the 5th or 6th film, how many people are rushing out to see that opening weekend? And so this is happening sort of to a diluted effect here with Creed 2, is that the people saw the first one probably and they liked it, really wanted to see the second one, and that's a really big group of people, but they went to go see it already. And so on the second weekend here, where it should be up in $18-19 million for the weekend, it's a little bit lower than that. It's just that audience had already gone out and seen it. Now, just like Ralph and just like Dr. Seuss, this thing is going to play all the way through Christmas. And so I expect this to have much lower drops over the next few weeks. I think it's going to do well from the Christmas holiday to New Year's, because it has that sort of, it's interesting. The the holiday movie season, is broken up into a lot of different buckets of what does well. You have your animated family films. You have your fun family dramas, not even dramas, fun family adventure stuff like Jumanji last year. And then you have your more adult films, and those are tend to adult dramas, and those are broken into art house and non-art house. And there's like The Mule next week is an example of a non-art house adult drama coming out that's sort of meant for mass appeal and mass release. I think Gran Torino may have been one too. Maybe that was the summer. Greatest Showman might be an example of that. I guess that's a whole nother vertical, musicals, which would be Mary Poppins this year. But the holiday season tends to have these buckets of films that do well. Adult dramas that are not art house, that are meant for mass release. Creed is one of those. And it's a real sort of fine line between it being really arty and too experimental and going the sort of the Academy Awards route, and then being sort of palatable and engaging and entertaining for an audience all over the country, which is very, very hard to do. Like someone in Peoria, Illinois or Omaha is very different than somebody in Scottsdale, Arizona or Eugene, Oregon, right? Like, so that it's a really, especially, and it's even harder. That's easier to do with like a blockbuster or even like a children's film, because there tends to be a shared language with those genres. With adult drama, it's much more difficult to do. And Creed 2, I think, has a good chance of really cashing in on that adult drama crowd for the holiday season. There's something about the film that I think will pull a lot of different groups of people in to see it. So I do expect these drops to go down significantly as we get closer and through the new year. Okay, so that's number 3 this weekend. Number 4 was Fantastic Beasts 2, 11.2 million. It's its third weekend, a massive 62% drop. This one is got to be a concern for Warner Brothers. Something, there needs to be a postmortem here. Something went wrong. Massive production budget, $200 million. If we look at weekend over weekend, had a big 52% drop, 53% drop last weekend, but not really that surprising, because it's like a sequel to like another sequel. And the more sequels you do, the drops tend to get bigger on their second weekends, because again, that audience is smaller and smaller. They all rush out to see it opening weekend, and then the general audience is not as big as it was for the original or the 10 sequels ago. So that's what's happening here, sequelitis. But you wouldn't want to see that that explains the second weekend drop. Right, that explains the 53% drop in its second weekend. Does not explain a 62% drop in its third weekend. That's a quality problem. That means people do not like this movie, and there's not a huge attraction here from a general audience. I think the Harry Potter people went to go see this. I think anybody who's a J.K. Rowling fan went to go see this, and then there's not much else, right? Like the general audience is just not into this. And so that's essentially what we're seeing here. A 62% drop is kind of a disaster for a movie like this. PG-13 fantasy, like you should be having families and, the whole wide spectrum of a general audience should be going to see this, and they're just not. And so I think Warner Brothers has to go back to the drawing board with this series. I think there's been a lot of complaints about J.K. Rowling doing the script here, and I think that's where a lot of critics pointed out the flaws. I'm sure the production was beautiful and wonderfully done, great CGI, very magical and very immersive, but I think the writing here was a problem, and I think audiences have really caught on to that. It is fascinating what a general audience will pick up on versus the critics, because there's a lot of cases where critics love a film and the general audience is just like, no, thank you. 2 recent examples we've talked about on the podcast would be First Man and Widows, neither of which are art house releases. Like if it was an art house release, I would get it, because those films tend to be more experimental. They're not even meant for a general audience. They're meant for a sort of film aficionado audience, or film snob audience is another way of putting that. But Widows and First Man were loved by critics, gushed about them. Like both were like over 90%. I know Widows was, in terms of Rotten Tomatoes score. And the general audience was just like, nah, I'm not into this. And that's more the case, that there's a disconnect between the critics and the audience. Here, there's a connection here, and it's on a pretty grand blockbuster scale where the audiences are just turning their noses up at this movie. And Warner Brothers does have to figure out where they're going to take the Harry Potter universe now. Because the Fantastic Beasts series, they haven't been total failures. This one's a much bigger failure than the original. They've made money. I think the original made like $160 million in profit. This one's more kind of in the break-even, smaller profit realm right now. And so that's not going to get them to green light a new one or a third one. If you're just breaking even or even making like $50 million in profit, that's usually not good enough to put your resources behind, because there's an opportunity cost. That the $200 million that they used to produce this film, now add on about $130 million just for marketing worldwide. So you're already talking about like $330 million to produce this thing. And there's other costs associated with it. It's probably more like $350, maybe even $400. That's a ton of cash to lay out to only make back $50 million. And then that's being optimistic, I think, for this movie. It might be closer to a break-even situation. So the next time, the Warner Brothers bean counters look at this, and the producers and the executives are going to be like, I don't know. We need a movie that's going to make us $100 million in profit. And I don't think a third one of this is going to do that. So they may pass. Or I think what they're going to end up doing is they got to keep the Harry Potter universe engaged. They got to keep it going because there's a lot of other properties and products associated with it. So what they'll probably do is think of just a different angle to approach the universe. I think like a different character group or something like that. Just a different story to tell. I think this line, the Fantastic Beasts, is probably coming to an end here with this pretty poor performance for Fantastic Beasts 2. Number 5, one of the bigger surprises of the fall into the holiday season now is Bohemian Rhapsody, $8.1 million, another fantastic 42% drop for the weekend. Per theater average was just about $2,700 for its fifth weekend. It has made $164 million just domestically. This one, I will note, has passed the 500 million mark worldwide. That is insane. $52 million production budget, maybe $100 million to market, probably less than that. I don't know. This one is going to print money for Fox. Bryan Singer, he got pulled off the project really late. This is kind of like maybe a little redemption for him. I don't really know what his situation is going on right now in the industry, but it's probably not very good. But this kind of helps him, I think. This is a huge, massive grand slam for Fox. There's no other way to put it. Very surprising, too, in that the early critical word on this was negative, and a lot of my favorite critics hate this movie, but audiences don't give a shit. They love Freddie Mercury. They love Rami Malek as him, and they love Queen. And I think that's essentially what happened here. Worldwide, it has just been playing so well. UK's got to be the biggest foreign market for this, and because they were a British band. UK outrageous $50 million. South Korea $36 million. Japan $20 million. France 23. Australia 20. That makes sense. Because Queen was a really huge worldwide phenomenon back then, so it makes sense that it's playing well throughout the world. One of the biggest surprises of the year, just because it's weird. Before the reviews dropped, I was like, I'm so into this. Like, this is going to do so well. This is one of my picks for a breakout of the fall. But when those reviews hit, I got like cold feet on it, and I sold on my Hollywood Stock Exchange stock on it. I was like, this is done. It's not going to do anything. It's going to be a disaster. But again, general audiences, they don't follow the critics. And so they went to go see it. They loved it. They had a great experience, and they spread the word. And now it's making over $500 million worldwide. Really cool story here in the fall holiday season of 2018. So that's Bohemian Rhapsody, 8.1 on the weekend, coming to number 5. Number 6 was Instant Family. This one's not going away. 7.1 million. Not bad. 42% drop. Somehow added 90 theaters. I don't know why they're doing that. Per theater average is close to that Mendoza line. Just about $2,100 per theater. $45 million in its third weekend. In terms of like this performance and how good it is, it's kind of hard to tell, but like It's not gonna do like Daddy's Home numbers, I don't think, unless it can. No, it's not gonna happen unless it like stuck around so well that like it just never went away. That's always a possibility in the holidays. Like I thought Jumanji and Greatest Showman were dead like the second week in January, but for some reason they just kept going all the way through. Like almost into spring. It was just bizarre to see it happen. So I don't know. I get the feeling it's playing better in its subsequent weekends after opening weekend than I thought it would. But it's still not going to be a huge win. I mean, Daddy's Home 2 did 104. Daddy's Home did 150. It's not going to make those numbers anywhere near it. But it's not the worst performance in the world. If I was judging it just based on opening weekend, I'd be like, oh, this thing's in trouble. But it really has stuck around with those low drops over the last few weeks. So I think Paramount's going to be a little bit happier about that. All right, let's keep this train rolling. Number 8 was Robin Hood, a 4.7 million, a 49% drop. That's a little bit lower than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be like a disaster, 60% drop. But it doesn't really matter. $21 million in the second weekend, $100 million production budget. This one is going to be a massive write-off for Lionsgate. One of the biggest flops of the year. I guess, was King Arthur this year? I can't even remember when King Arthur came out. I think it was maybe last year. Also a huge... Medieval stuff is just not playing well these days. And like these stories are tired and boring. And I just don't think like millennials and Gen Z are really into this stuff right now. We have Game of Thrones. Like we have these new stories about that time period or that sort of medieval fantasy land, if you will, that we're into. And these aren't well done movies. This Robin Hood movie is just like a real stinker. Just like a total mess. Like, read some of the reviews. I think I read one last week on the podcast. It was just like, it's a mess. This whole thing was a complete disaster. Deadline has a great write-up about it. Definitely read that if you have a chance. But this one's going nowhere. One of the biggest flops of the year. Number 9, Widows, 4.4 million, 46% drop, losing theaters, lost 400 theaters this weekend. It's below the 2,000 per theater mark, below that Mendoza line. And its third weekend and has only made $33 million. I have egg in my face on this one. I've been calling this as a huge breakout for like the last 3 to 4 months. And it just has not happened here, unfortunately. And this is, like I mentioned earlier, the critics love this, over 90% in Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences just didn't like it. And I have to see it because I haven't seen it yet. I would love to see it. I can't necessarily figure out why that is the case. I think it's a little bit too obtuse. I think it was probably a little bit too arty for general audiences. And the thing about this is, there's a huge problem if you can get someone a butt in the seat, if you can get them over that barrier of getting in their car, carving out 3-4 hours of their day or night to go see a movie, and you get them there and you sell something in the ad and what they get is something different, they get pissed. And maybe I would say rightly so. If your marketing is kind of tricking people, a perfect example of this is It Comes at Night, which is actually a phenomenal film, but they mismarketed it so poorly that the people who went to go see it over the weekend were just like, what the F is this? This is not at all what you advertised. And I think there's a little bit of that here because it's advertised as sort of like a female version of Heat, right? And I don't think that's what it is at all. I think it's a lot more... No, Heat's brilliant. Maybe Heat's not a good example. Maybe it was just like a female heist movie. And I think it's really rich and a really engaging film. Obviously, critics love it. But I don't think that's what people were expecting when they went to go see it. And that's why it's doing so poorly. It does really feel like it was mismarketed as more of an action heist film when I think it's more of a drama. And dealing with emotions and relationships and stuff like that. And I don't think that's what people bought when they got that. Thought they were buying when they bought a ticket for it. So I think that explains to some degree why it's doing so poorly. Number 10 this weekend was Green Book. 3.9 million, 29% drop. Great drop. Deadline had some numbers on that. It is the post-track stuff is really strong. So there should be strong word of mouth here. It's in 1,000 theaters. We talked a lot about release strategy on this the last couple of weeks. How is Universal going to get this out? This is absolutely, like I was talking about Creed 2, this is one of those adult drama holiday movies that walks that fine line between like awards contender and just like box office hit, right? Like it's hard to do both, or to say more like general audience engaging movie. And it's trying to do both, and it is a hard line to walk. I thought it was going to do better than this. It's got $14 million in its third weekend. Based on the critical gushing over this movie and its award or win at the Toronto Film Festival, there was something about this that felt like it was going to be a massive hit, and that 50, 60, maybe $100 million were in play for this. That's what I, in my gut, felt. That is not coming to fruition. And it's in 1,000 theaters. The key metric here is probably its per theater average, which is $3,700. That's good. And if it stays at that for like a very long time, it can make a lot of money. My concern is that what goes up comes down. And at the box office, a movie rarely ever does better than its opening weekend. Very, very rarely. Now, the holiday season was one of those exceptions. And a film like this, I look back to Hidden Figures as a movie that just stuck around weekend after weekend, dropping 20%, dropping 30%, like in those ranges for like 2-3 months. If it does that, it will make a fair amount of money and Universal will be happy. I have a feeling, though, that it might disappear and flame out before it can get to that point. Just because it's at 1,000 theaters, $3,700, 29% drop is great. Best in the top 10, best anything over 1,000 theaters. But I just don't know if it has the punch, the staying power. I don't know. I don't see it right now in these numbers. I see it in the film and the quality and the marketing, and I see that, but I don't see it in the numbers. So I think that's a little bit of a concern here for Universal. But we'll see where it goes. All right, so that's the top 10. Outside the top 10, Stars Born is still sticking around. Like I said, it's going to be here through the new year. And if it can ride that wave and hit the awards nominations in early January, it's never going to go away. What else is doing on the Nutcracker is a huge bomb, 1.2 million, sub $1,000 per theater average in its fifth weekend. That's terrible. To note here, let's talk a little bit about awards films. The Favorite had an expansion. It had that amazing per theater average last weekend when it opened up in New York and Los Angeles. Here's another test. Now it's pushed out to 30 more theaters from the original 4. 32,000 per theater average in 34 theaters is strong. That's better than what was that? I always forget the movie that won Best Picture last year. And I honestly can't remember now. It's gone. It's completely gone on my head. But it's doing $32,000 is good for this number of theaters. The question is, again, and Deadline plays some lip service and say, hey, it's playing well to the hipster crowd. Hey, it's playing well to the cinephile crowd. Those are like essentially the same crowds. What I need to see for this thing to really break out is how is it going to play in Milwaukee? That's where I grew up, Milwaukee. Very middle of the road city. Part of the sort of, Great Lakes Rust Belt situation. Used to be a lot bigger city than it is. It's not like massively cosmopolitan. It's got 2 million people, 1 to 2 million people, somewhere in that range. There's a lot of cities in the United States just like that. That's where I want to see it play well, because I know Milwaukee. It's going to play at the downtown theaters, the Oriental or something like that, the Art House Theater, which every bigger city has. The question is it going to play out in the suburbs? Is it going to play out in Brookfield, where I grew up, at the Marcus Majestic Theater, which is their big flagship theater for that whole chain of theaters? Is it going to play well there? That's what I want to know. Because if it plays well in a place like Brookfield at the Majestic, then I know The Favorite is breaking out. And I just don't know if it's going to play well to that audience. I get the feeling that it might, because it has these really big name stars, Rachel Weisz, Emma Stone. So it has that potential, but is the period piece aspect of it going to rub people the wrong way? Is it being marketed to that group of people right now? So this $32K is a fantastic performance, and it's these 34 theaters, but I don't know where it's going to go from here. My guess is it's going to flame out pretty quickly because it's going to go through that cosmopolitan, urban, cinephile audience very quickly. And once it tries to transition to general audiences, I just don't see it doing very well. Is it gonna play in Brookfield? I don't know. I don't think it's gonna play very well. Okay, so that's the favorite. A decent, well, I don't say decent, a very strong second weekend, still in the platform phase of its release. Whether it can make the leap to wide release, I'm not really sure. Boy Erased is still around, not doing too much more. 5.5 million its fifth weekend. That's not going to make much more money. Still some awards contention though for that. It's an okay performance. Can You Ever Forgive Me? This one's not going anywhere. 6.5 million seventh weekend. That's not going to do any more than it's done. Shoplifters, which I was really disappointed with its performance last weekend. This one's going nowhere. This one's really upsetting to me because Shoplifters had a buzz surrounding it from critics that has rivaled, I think, any movie I've ever heard about. It sounded like to me the same buzz that was behind Moonlight a couple of years back. Critics were just like nearly crying in reviews about it, like how good it was. And it's only in 14 theaters, and its per theater average is $7,500. It's going nowhere. I think Shoplifters is one of those movies that won't even play in like Chicago very well. Like it's just like, even a city with millions of people, there's just not a big enough art house cinephile audience that's going to go see this and really support it. And so unfortunately Shoplifters, which is considered one of the best films of the year, I don't see it doing a lot of financial success for it here, in the States at least. Old Man the Gun, 10.9 million so far in its 10th weekend. That one's pretty much done in its run. Some newer ones, And the Apocalypse, 5 theaters, 10K per theater, going nowhere. Is there anything else in terms of the limited releases? Not too much. So, what I'm seeing right now is this feels a little bit similar to last year, is that we have a lot of really good art house movies coming out. And they're all platform releases. They're all meant to be awards contenders. But none of them are really doing all that well in terms of financial success here. They're just not making a lot of cash. And I know that's too bad, because I think a lot of these movies are interesting. And it does sort of bring up the question, is there really a good releasing strategy for any of these movies? Because we all know, here's the thing I know these movies are very good. I know that they're very high quality. Why are they not making money? And, that's the big thing. Why are they not making money? And if they don't make money, sure, that hurts their awards contention, right? But finally, The Shape of the Water. That was a movie I was thinking about comparing the favorite. The Shape of the Water had similar, I think it was in like 27 theaters, 30 theaters, and it did about 27K per theater. So The Favorite's doing better than The Shape of Water. But back to sort of like this release, think about the movie like Roma right now. There's only one other movie that people have gushed about more this year over Shoplifters and The Favorite. It's Roma. And that's a Netflix release. Netflix has put it on a couple theaters to get awards contention, but then they're basically pulling it and say, hey, watch it on Netflix. It'll be on Netflix in about, I think, 2 weeks, maybe even less. So that seems to me like maybe a little bit of a smarter release strategy. We'll see how it plays out with the awards contention. But from an artist perspective, it's probably going to have a much bigger impact getting this like strange limited release in a couple of cities, but then getting on Netflix where the entire world can see it right away. From an artistic perspective, it's going to be a huge lift for everybody involved in that, because everybody's going to see it. The question is it going to hurt its awards contention? I think, yeah, probably, because Netflix is still a dirty word in the industry for a lot of people. They don't like how they're releasing films. They don't like that they're becoming a monopoly. But for the rest of the films that aren't having these sort of Netflix releases simultaneous with a theatrical release, a lot of them are kind of in trouble. Like, are they going to make any money? You kind of have to think, too, that these studios are using these awards films as almost like marketing campaigns for the studio. That's often, sadly, what they are. Like, the only reason they put them out and do an awards push is to get that publicity from a win or even from a nomination. So a lot of these movies are kind of DOA financially when they get released. But sometimes we have a breakout, you know, like Manchester Just by the Sea a couple of years ago. That did really decent. I think it was like 40, 50, $60 million, something like that. And they're like 50. So every once in a while, those art house films can do well. Unfortunately, this year, none of them are really breaking out. And this all, you know, what movie this helps in terms of the award stuff? A Star is Born and Green Book. Because if there's not a lot of like really arty competition, then the more mainstream art films, awards contenders like Star is Born and Green Book are going to do a lot better at the awards. But that's how it is now. I kind of see like what's coming out on the limited schedule here. Let's just talk about what's going to happen in the next few weeks and see if there's any sort of Oscar movies that I want to call out that I think are going to do quite well. So next weekend is the 7th. Schindler's List is getting re-released. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the 20th anniversary. No, 25th maybe. 1,000 theaters from Universal. Not sure how that's going to do. It's also a really weird political environment now. I don't know. I think it's going to do okay. I just hope there's no like incidents. Things have changed so much in the 25 years since that movie came out. It's just like when that movie came out, anti-Semitism in the United States it existed, but it was so on the fringes. And now, unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not on the fringes at all anymore. It's out in the open in a lot of cases, especially with younger people who have been brainwashed by fake news on Facebook and all these weird alt-right conspiracy theories that are essentially just old anti-Semitism stuff. So I'm a little bit worried about that movie coming out, and like there's going to be, and we had the synagogue shooting about a month ago, the worst I think crime against Jewish people in the United States, or shooting or something. I don't know. It was bad. It was really bad. So I'm a little concerned about that movie coming out in 1,000 theaters. I just hope there's no incidences with it. It's a wonderful movie. You haven't seen Schindler's List. It's like an all-time classic. You must see it. But that's coming out on the 7th. Mary Queen of Scots is coming out. And there's been a lot of awards talk about that. I have not seen a ton of reviews for it, so I don't know. It's like 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. The real question is, how many reviews does it have? So that could be an awards contender coming out here in the next week or so. And then what else do we have? Vox Lux from Neon. Check that one out. Neon's a really cool distribution company. Mortal Engines is coming out from Universal on the 14th. The Mule is a lot of, I think, if it does well financially, it has a good chance at some awards. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the animated Spider-Man film from Sony, is also coming out the 14th. For limited release-wise, If Beale Street Could Talk, talking about Moonlight, Barry Jenkins. This is his next film from Annapurna. Now, does Annapurna have any money to release this thing? Hopefully. Mary Queen of Scots, by the way, is at 93% Rotten Tomatoes, 28 reviews so far. So that's pretty good. That bodes well for that. It's getting some nominations. If Beale Street Could Talk looks great. Barry Jenkins is a fantastic director. I'm not sure how well that's going to do, though, because it's Annapurna. They have some problems with distribution, so we'll see. The 12th is Once Upon a Deadpool, which is actually the Wednesday before those movies are coming out. I'll see I don't know. I still don't understand what they're doing with that. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't even want to understand it. The 21st, Aquaman, Bumblebee, second act, Welcome to Marwen. I guarantee is going to be one of the biggest bombs of the year. I have no idea why they made that movie. It makes no sense. The marketing makes no sense. The concept makes no sense. I just feel like it's this year's downsizing. Aquaman's going to do very well, of course. DCEU looks pretty decent. James Wan directing. Bumblebee is kind of an afterthought, part of the Transformers universe. I don't think it's going to do that well. Second act is an STX, like a 90s ripoff rom-com thing with Jennifer Lopez. Could do okay. We'll see. And then the big one hits actually 2 days before this on Wednesday, the 19th. Mary Poppins Returns. Still my pick for the breakout. I feel like Mary Poppins is going to play well through like March. Like I think it's going to make like domestically, I don't even know, $200 million, $300 million. It's going to do fantastic. And then on Christmas, you have Vice, which has a lot of awards buzz to it. Again, that one walks that fine line between art house platform release and wide release. It's Annapurna, though, who has no money. So we'll see how they're doing on this release. And then Holmes and Watson, which I think is going to do very well. I mean, Step Brothers is now this huge... It's not even a cult classic. It's just like a huge movie, especially on younger people, younger than me. And I think that team up again should be huge with Holmes and Watson. So I think that's going to do very well on Christmas and through the end of the year. Then let's hint at January. I don't want to dive too deep in January. But we have Eli as a horror movie coming out on the 4th. That's a pretty bold move to come out so close to Glass, right? And so that's coming out early, a few days after New Year's. And then what else is coming out in January? Just getting really kind of curious. 2 horror films, Escape Room and Eli. Escape Room looks really stupid and fun. I might go see that. Though this looks totally absurd. That's coming out that same weekend. Apparently early January is now a horror weekend. Replicas, The Upside, The Dog's Way Home comes out. The big one in January is going to be Glass, which comes out on the 18th. That will be the massive movie in this January. It might make January a blockbuster month for opening a movie if Glass does that well. What's it going to do? I don't even know. What did Split do? I can't remember what Split did. I gotta look it up. I think it was on like 40s or something. Yeah, it did $40 million opening weekend in January 2 years ago. So I feel this one's gonna blast through 40. I feel that's gonna do like 60, 70, up on to 80, could break 100 even. There's just something about it that like gets everybody hyped. Everybody is hyped about Glass, whether you're like 13 years old or you're like 50 years old. Everybody wants to see it. So I think it's going to do quite well and sort of open up January to more blockbuster releases. Okay, that's all I got for this weekend, guys. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next weekend. It's going to be a quiet one, so maybe I'll do a special show next Sunday. Maybe we'll do like a holiday preview, and I'll guess what everything's going to do. That'll be the plan. Thanks for listening, guys. This is In the Wildline.